Welcome to the Productivity Show podcast, where we believe that you can get the important things done without having to sacrifice your health, family, and things that matter to you. My name is Tan. I'm the founder and CEO of Asian Efficiency. This is where we help people become more productive at work and in life. And today I'm joined, of course, by my co-host, Brooks Duncan. How are you today, Brooks?
I'm great. How's it going, Tan?
Good. Just finished working out. I'm planning to have like a big meal after we finish our podcast today. So between you and I, there's a podcast episode that's standing in the way of me enjoying a lovely meal. But we're not going to cut it short today because we have a lot of important stuff to go over. So we're going to be talking about what's kind of happening in our industry, new trends you want to be aware of so you can stay ahead of the curve. And aside from the news, we're going to be talking about three important things here. One is, what's the middle ground between like a DM or a direct message and a meeting? Is there something like that? The second thing is we're going to be talking about the 996 work culture, what that means and what the problems are that come with that. And then also, how has the pandemic impacted productivity? There was actually a research study that came out of this, which is very interesting to see. We're going to be talking about that as well. So as always, we like to kind of like highlight what next week's episode is. And I believe, Brooks, you did this one, right?
Yeah, I sure did. So next week, I'm going to be talking to Edward Sullivan. So he's a executive coach, coaches for a lot of large organizations. He's also coached for heads of state. So that's quite a resume. So he's going to be talking about leadership, and leading with heart is his whole thing. So we're going to be diving into what that means and how you can do that and the benefits of that. So that's what we're going to be talking about next episode. But this episode, we like to start every single podcast with our top three resources. So these are three things that we're loving lately or that are making us more productive. And so I guess I will tackle it since I'm continuing to talk. So resource number one is, well, it's an app called Fantastical, which we've talked about a lot. It's a Mac calendar app. So I'm not talking about the app in general. I'm talking about a specific feature that I've been really liking. And basically, there's a setting in Fantastical which shows your next appointment in your menu bar. So this one's only for Mac users, but the menu bar up at the top, what it does is it shows your next appointment there. And I've actually found that really, really helpful, so that when I'm working, I kind of know like how much time I have until my next thing. And it's worked out really, really well. So if you're a Fantastical user, recommend turning that on, just seeing how you like it. If you don't, you can always turn it off again. That's number one. Number two is VLC. So this is an open source video player. It's been around on Windows forever. It's on the Mac. It's actually pretty much on all platforms. It's also available on mobile. And it's an app that I don't use a lot, but very occasionally, because it's a video player that can play anything. So sometimes maybe you get like an old video in some weird format, or you download something and you're not able to play it using the normal video player. Chances are, if it's video, VLC will be able to play it. So check that out if you're ever having trouble playing a video. And number three is Paperlike. So Paperlike is a kind of like a sticker that you put on your iPad. And what it does is it makes writing on an iPad feel like writing on paper. So if you have an Apple Pencil, you might be into writing on it, but it still has this weird like tapping thing, which isn't so great for writing on. So Paperlike, the people who use it really, really love it. It makes it feel like you're writing on paper and makes writing on the iPad a lot better. So those are our top three resources. You can find links to everything that we share in the show by going to theproductivityshow.com/410. All right, so we are going to get started. So these type of episodes, these are always really fun for me to do. I don't know about you, Tan. I always enjoy them. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about some of our things that are happening in productivity, things that we've noticed, and then we're going to be, like Tan said, we're going to be covering some specific topics. But let's start with kind of like some more newsworthy things that are going on in the productivity space. And I'm curious, Tan, what your thoughts on some of these are. So feel free to respond to whatever you choose to. Number one is an app that I use called Matter. So Matter is a read later app, kind of in the vein of Pocket or Instapaper. Kind of does a bit more than those. It's also great for reading discovery as well. The only downside of Matter has always been that it's only available for mobile, but they now have a web version. So if you go to hq.getmatter.app, you can use the web version. So you're not just stuck using iOS to read your stuff. You can capture and read to it on any device, as long as you can get to a web browser. So that is the first one. Matter is on the web too. So if you've checked out Matter before, recommend checking that out. Number two is it's sort of new feature of a program called Microsoft Loop. And what this has is Loop components have been rolled out now to Microsoft Outlook and Microsoft Teams. So if you're not familiar with Microsoft Loop, it's Microsoft, they call it a flexible canvas app. Basically, what I would say is it's kind of their response to Notion, whether they would admit it or not. And so, you can create these great looking workspaces and dashboards, and they update real time, and people can use them to collaborate. But one of the benefits of using Loop, if you're already in the Microsoft ecosystem, is they can do things that no one else can do, which is take elements from Loop and put them into other Microsoft things. So you could put them into an Outlook email or into a Teams channel or whatever. So an example is you could take one of these components, these Loop components, put them in an email, and maybe you could send out a task list to your team, and the task list is embedded in the email. But as people check tasks off, the email and the status would be updated automatically. You don't have to click to go into Loop. It would be right there in Teams or right there in the actual email message. Or maybe you could collaborate with people on a piece of text, massaging a headline or something like that, or a paragraph. And everybody who's looking at that email, it's updated right in the email. So it's kind of crazy, the sort of things that you could do with a feature like this. And that is one of the benefits, I think, of using kind of like a one ecosystem, is it unlocks these type of abilities. And there's tasks, lists, paragraphs, voting, and tables, and a bunch of different things. So that's the second one, Loop components, which I think is something I'm going to be keeping an eye on, seeing the sorts of things that you can do with that, because it's quite impressive. And number three, I just wanted to touch on Google I/O. So Google I/O is Google's big developer conference. Apple has their WWDC, Google has I/O. And like Apple, they always make hardware and software announcements. So just wanted to mention a few of those. So Android 13, it's already in developer beta. This is one thing that's different about Microsoft than Apple. Apple kind of like showing it at the thing, where Google often seeds things beforehand. So a few things like spatial audio. But the thing that I found kind of interesting, though I'm skeptical if I would ever use it, is you can edit copied text before pasting it. So you copy some text and you can edit it and then paste it. So that's kind of interesting. There's also Google Pixel Buds Pro, which has active noise canceling, just like AirPods Pro, but also different colors, which I thought was kind of cool. And they're announcing a Google Pixel tablet. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes as well. So a bunch of different things. We'll have a link in the show notes to a recap of Google I/O. So Tan, what do you think? Are you going to be getting some Google Pixel Buds Pro or signing up for Microsoft Loop? What do you think of these?
Yeah, I think it's always very cool to see what competition, quote unquote, is doing, because I'm mostly Apple user myself, so I always find it interesting. A lot of my friends have Android phones and such, and I'm very impressed by the photo qualities of a lot of those phones, but I'm never a big fan of the operating system itself. And now I'm a little bit of a novice to Android for the most part as well, so I'm sure if I learned half a day how to use it and such, it's actually great. And I hear all the time too from Android users that oftentimes Apple will copy stuff from Androids, which I have no doubts that happens. So it's always cool to see that they do stuff, because I do feel like they're a little bit more on the cutting edge in terms of UI and interface versus Apple. So I think for me, it's always interesting to see what they're doing. And same thing with Microsoft and what they're trying to roll out. And Microsoft has done a really good job the last few years, kind of reviving from the dead, so to speak, because they're highly relevant now. I think their software suite is very impressive. And just we've talked a lot about them over the last few months, and just seeing them roll out new features and things that people want is really impressive. They really seem to be doing a good job of that. And so I'm always keeping an eye out on those two companies just because I want to make sure that one, we stay up to date internally, but also two, that when stuff does roll out, that everyone knows about it, because oftentimes those hidden features or settings sometimes can make such a big difference in terms of your workflows and how you do things, and also the problems that we solve for a lot of people that follow us. And so I always found it very interesting to hear about them. And before I move on to our next segment here on the podcast, I do want to give a quick shout out to our TPS Plus listeners. This is the upgraded version of the Productivity Show. So if you like to listen to us, but you want to maybe skip the ads and maybe have the episodes a week earlier, then you should consider upgrading to TPS Plus. So you can go to theproductivityshow.com/plus. So that's PLUS. You'll get a better experience listening to our show with no ads. And you get them a week earlier. Plus, you get some other bonus content as well that's only available for members. So go check it out, theproductivityshow.com/plus. I want to give a shout out to everyone and thank everyone who has signed up so far. All right, so let's move over to our industry happening. So we always like to kind of observe what conversations people are having in our industry and what's going on. And like we have to talk about, the 996 culture, and then also what happened during the pandemic. How has that affected productivity? But before we do that, Brooks, you brought up an interesting point here. I see here in the notes, you are looking for something between like a direct message and a full meeting. Can you explain what you mean with this?
Yeah, I was thinking about this because I was playing with a feature of Slack. And if you're a Slack user, I would recommend checking this out. And it's called the Slack Huddle feature. And it might be there, but you just haven't really noticed it. And so I was playing with it, and then it made me think of this concept where there's situations where maybe you have a question for somebody, and so you're DMing them, or maybe you're typing in your general channel, and this could be Slack, Teams, whatever you happen to be using. And or maybe you have a scheduled meeting, and then you go into Zoom or Teams or Slack to jump into those meetings. And so like it's kind of like two different things, right? You're DMing quick questions, or you're having a full meeting. But I feel like there's these kind of like in between situations where there's a lot of productivity opportunities for making things move faster, where maybe you could quickly jump into voice or video or dictate something, and you realize maybe it would be faster to discuss something quickly than to type it out. Or maybe you want to just have like a quick collaboration, like a 2-minute collaboration just to hash something out quickly. Or maybe you want to give instructions to multiple people versus one-on-one, but you don't want to like type it all out. So I feel like that's kind of like a gray zone. And yeah, you could like create a new meeting and everybody could go jump into Zoom. But I think there's an opportunity, like I said, for some productivity benefit in between that. And there are some ways that I've seen people solve this. And one of them is and I know, Tan, you've done this in the past because I've been sitting in an Uber with you while you've been doing it. But some of the ways that you could solve this is recording quick audio and video notes and send it to the person. So you could do this just with built-in recording software. You can do things like use shortcuts to record something and send it out. There's also apps and services that you can use this. So Marco Polo is a popular one, and Voxer is another one. Those are really popular for this sort of thing. But if your communication platform supports it, which Slack does, I'm not sure about Teams. So if you know about this, I would love to hear about it. But Slack has a feature called Slack Huddle. And what it is, I've been sucked. I don't know about you, Tam. My guess is no, but I've been sucked into more and more Discords lately because it seems like that's where a lot of communities are going. So I'm quite familiar with Discord. And I feel like this Slack Huddle feature is kind of inspired a lot by Discord. But basically what it is if you're in a channel or in a DM with somebody, there's a little headphones icon down there, and you just click it. And what that'll happen is you can then start talking. And what you can do is, but the people who are in the channel can't necessarily hear you, you can invite either the whole channel or people you want to kind of like listen in. And it's not taking over their screen. They're not having to jump into somewhere else. It's just in a little window down in the bottom. And so they can hear, they can participate. If you want, you can screen share and share your video, but you don't have to. You can even turn on captions so people can follow along with what you're saying, even if they're in a situation where they can't hear you, like maybe they're on in a cafe or something like that. And you just turn it on, people listen and see, and then you turn it off when you're done. And I think more and more people are going to start doing this, this like quick in between a DM and a meeting. And I think that can really accelerate productivity by just making things move faster rather than having to like type notes in and send them later. You can just get things done and transferred right away. How about you, Tan? Do you still do the thing like recording audio and stuff like that and sending it, or how do you do this?
Yeah, I would typically only use it with my executive assistant, to be honest. So I have a shortcut in iOS that I have set up. So it basically records a voice message, uploads it to Dropbox in a specific folder, and then fires off an email to my executive assistant, and then she can listen to it whenever. We also use WhatsApp, so sometimes I'll do that if I have access to it. But usually, if it's the shortcut, it's usually not that urgent. Again, we kind of have this protocol set up. If I send you an email, it's probably not that important, so it can wait. Versus if I send you a message on Slack or WhatsApp, then it's probably a little bit more urgent. So as far as like within the team, I personally just kind of like go, hey, Brooks, I need to talk to you about something. Let me know whenever you're ready. And then we'll just kind of hop on Zoom real quick. But I can see how that in between would be helpful, or it can be a little bit more asynchronous in that sense, right? But I personally haven't seen the need for it that much, because I kind of find like, okay, if we do the huddle right every day, kind of answers a lot of questions and we kind of stick around afterwards. But I can see other team members as they're working through stuff that they go, oh yeah, I wish I could like asynchronously kind of like get some feedback or something.
Well, I will tell you that I do get a lot of questions throughout the day. So this is something that I am going to start using more and more with our team, because they often have a lot of like just things that now that I'm thinking about it and we're recording this episode, there's a lot of things that I maybe could show them, questions that they have, like little demos. And again, it doesn't warrant a whole meeting. Like I really don't feel like jumping into Zoom and taking over my computer and that sort of thing, but just busting off a quick like 2-minute little thing that they would find helpful. Versus typing a bunch of stuff out. I think it's valuable. So I'm going to start doing this. But if you're listening to this, I'm just curious if you have any other solutions for these kind of like in between worlds. Let us know.
Awesome. So let's move over to our second topic here. And that is, I recently came across an article. It was titled something along the lines of like TikTok employees complain about the 996 work culture. So there's a Business Insider article, which we can link to. But if you're unfamiliar with the term 996, it stands for starting at 9 a.m., ending your workday at 9 p.m., and doing it 6 days a week. So 996 is what that represents. And this is a very common practice in tech companies in China. So people are working 6 days a week from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. So 12-hour days, if not longer. And oftentimes it is longer. So this has been kind of like a big point of emphasis over the last, I want to say, year and a half, 2 years. You might have heard how like working conditions in China aren't that great, especially for tech companies. And people are kind of like clamping down on it. And then also now that, this article was kind of saying how TikTok employees were complaining about the work culture. Like someone in the article said, meetings with colleagues in the UK and China that would sometimes run until midnight. When she complained to her executive team, they told her she didn't have to attend meetings, but she felt like she was too junior to decline. And she said, I don't have that privilege, she said. And so I can see how even if people say that you don't have to be on this meeting when you're like maybe new or you're not like like at a high function just yet. It can feel like you kind of have to be there if you want to work your way up. And so it's kind of an interesting culture in that sense, and something we don't really have here at AE. If anything, I go the opposite and say, hey, start at 9 a.m. and end at 3 p.m. or something if you can, 4 days a week if we can. Just like we have a 4-day work week a few times a year. And so when you're working in a company that is like high growth and like has time zones where you have like stuff in Europe and China, if you're here based in the US, like you kind of are stuck in the middle because you have to wake up early to talk to the people in Europe, but then you have to stay late to talk to the people in Asia. And it's like the worst time zone overlap to be in. And so it seems like it's affecting a lot of people. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is more common in other companies. But I was also having dinner with a TikTok executive, 4 days ago. I was having dinner with them. And I asked him about this and I said, hey, I read about this article. What's your take on it? And he said, there's definitely a culture of like hard work and there's a lot of meetings and such, but nobody forces you to do stuff. So if you don't want to be there, you don't have to be there. And he said, on my days off, I still work sometimes because I like the work that I do. So I don't feel like it's work. And I thought that was an interesting take too, where he knows he's working a lot and he enjoys the work and he's okay working a lot. And he says like when he's hiring people, he's looking for that too. So it's kind of like, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, there's actually a lot to unpack here with this thing, because I think this is a really good example of how you need to choose the culture of the place you work really, really carefully. And I don't know how you do that other than like you did just now. Like I'm assuming you're not looking for a job at TikTok, but if you were, you want to try your best to talk to the people in there and find out what it's really like, because there's what you are required to do and what you feel like you need to do. It's kind of like, a lot of companies abuse this concept of unlimited vacations. Now we have an unlimited vacation at AE, but I think you and Marmel do a very good job of, if people aren't using it, it's like you said, it's the opposite way. If people aren't taking enough time on, you're like, hey, it's off. You're like, hey, it's it's time to maybe consider taking a break. But a lot of companies, they do it because they know if there isn't a strict amount of vacation you're supposed to take, then people will feel like they can't take hardly any. And I think these meeting concepts is the same thing, where you can tell people, oh, you don't need to be there. But the unsaid part of that is everyone else is. So you don't need to be there. But if you're wanting that promotion, this is the unsaid part. If you're wanting that promotion, if you're wanting high level stuff, who are we going to promote? The person who's there or the person who isn't? Of course, it's going to be the people who are there. So all to say, it's on the employer to, of course, set the work culture that they want, but it's also on the people who join companies to try and find out what the culture is like, I would say. That's number one. Number two, I think geography plays a big part in this too, because what you described with the big time zone thing with meetings, living where I do in Vancouver, this is a very common thing, because we kind of are equally, like, the Pacific time zone is great for a lot of things, but it's not great because you're equally in horrible situations for Asia and Europe. So if you work for a company like my wife, for example, she works for a company where she has colleagues and people she needs to present to in Europe, but she also has colleagues and people she needs to present to in Asia. So occasionally that does happen, where she's going to work at 7 a.m. To do a meeting, and then she's staying late till 6, 7 p.m. To do the same meeting for Asia, or sometimes she'll even come home and do it from home instead. But either way, it's very difficult. And again, there's only so much you can do about it if you are joining a company that is in that situation.
Yeah, I guess what I wonder then is, well, first of all, two things. One is, if your wife is in that situation where she has to wake up early and then stay late, like what happens in between? Does she then kind of like for normal life, right? Like non-work stuff, or is she working the whole time to kind of stay in the loop and do that.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said about the TikTok executive or person you were talking to, I think that says a lot too, because it really depends on the person. Like your friend or the person you're talking to said, that's just what they like. So they're just going to do it. That's their natural thing. My wife is kind of that way too. She's kind of like an energizer bunny in a way. Like she's gonna keep going all the way through. So that's how she does things. Though she does like go jogging at lunchtime and stuff like that. But yeah, she would generally go the whole way through. It's not like she would stop working in between. I think like geography and culture you're used to can influence things a lot, because I always think of this time when I worked in corporate. Vancouver, West Coast, like it's pretty laid back in general compared to other parts of the world in North America. And so when my software company was bought out by a larger company, and all of a sudden I was going to New York quite a bit, I remember the first time my colleagues and I went to New York to work from the New York office. And, we were asking around like, hey, where do you guys go for your lunch breaks and stuff like that? And the people in the New York office are like, lunch breaks? Like, what are you talking about lunch breaks? Maybe I'll go down, grab a smoothie and come back to my desk. Like, what the heck are you talking about? So again, it really depends on what you're used to and the culture you have around you for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anybody necessarily quote unquote at fault here, because if the company says like, hey, this is how we do it, it is like 996 kind of vibe here, then it's up to you as the employee to say, I'm going to accept that, right, and then go for it, or to say, hey, I'm going to decline, that's not for me. Now if it was a bait and switch where they said, hey, you're going to work like from 9 to 5, everything else is optional, but then you kind of feel like you can't, then I think that's a little bit more murky. Or if it's really that optional and you have a problem saying no, like then it's up to the employee to say, hey, that's really on you, like that's not really on the company culture if it's really that optional. So yeah, I mean, it's after reading the article, it's kind of incomplete, and every company culture is a little different, right? And also, like, who gets promoted? Is it the people that show up, or is it the people that actually deliver the results, right? Or is it a combination of both? Like, it's just hard to say. So I think what we can conclude from all of this, and what we probably both agree with, is that 996 is just not sustainable for anybody to work those long days, 6 days a week. I think the whole concept of like the 40-hour work week, I think that's something we've talked about many times now, is outdated in many ways as well. Like we can get a lot of the same work done in probably 30 hours. Hence why we, kind of done the 4-day work week. And we've seen that, to be just as effective. And we can probably push it even further and say, hey, what if we do the 4-day work week, but instead of cramming 40 hours, what if we tried to limit it to, let's say, 35 hours, and maybe even get it down to 30 hours of work in 4 days, and still hitting the same outcome, right? I do think that the 40-hour work week is kind of an outdated model, because it was invented back in, early 20th century, I should say, based on kind of like manufacturing, factory work. And that doesn't necessarily apply to how we do things now. So but that's another discussion to be continued. So if you're listening to this and you have a strong opinion, let us know on the podcast. You can email us at podcast@asianefficiency.com if you want to, and we're happy to take your take on it and discuss it as well. So moving on to the third and final topic here. This is actually a very interesting topic that I came across. So I was doing some research on our industry, and one of the things that I came across was there was a research study that measured the productivity of employees in 2020. So that's like the big year of the big pause, right? Versus 2019, so the year before. And if you had to guess, which year do you think people were more productive? Was it in 2020 or was it in 2019? Well, according to this research study by Protoscore Research Council, or PRC, which is a productivity intelligence company, what they did is they analyzed employee productivity before the pandemic, and then also again after the pandemic in 2020. And so what it showed was 2020 versus 2019 year over year shows greater productivity in every single month. So let me say that one more time. from January through December, it showed higher productivity in 2020 versus 2019. And I don't know about you, Brooks, but I was very surprised by that. That every single month like was more productive. There was even not even a pause somewhere. But the other interesting insight is what they said in the report was, and I'm quoting here: poorly productive employees prior to the pandemic got worse when they started working from home. And they also said that the average start time between January 2020 and January 2021, so 1 year, drifted from 8:24 a.m. to 7:46 a.m., meaning they started working earlier, while the end time moves from 5:31 p.m. to 6:12 p.m. So in other words, when they ended their dates or their day of working was a little bit later as well. So they started working earlier and then they ended their day working early as well in the whole year of 2020. And my analysis of this is, as someone who's been working from home for many years, something that we also teach inside of our course, Productive at Home, which is all about showing you how to be productive working from home. One of the things I've definitely discovered is when you're in a remote setting or working from home, it's kind of hard sometimes to turn off work mode because you can kind of like work whenever, and meetings aren't like as quote unquote required or timely. And typically there are few meetings when you go remote as well. And so you tend to work whenever you kind of want to and end a little bit later as well. And you don't have the trigger that says like, oh, we have to start working now. Like if you're at an office and you see like your coworker leaving the office, or you hear that door getting shut that, you know, like someone just left, you go, oh yeah, it's 5 o'clock. I should probably start wrapping up and going home. Like you don't have that when you're working from home. You don't have those kind of triggers, right? So I'm not surprised that people are ending their workdays a little later and also starting earlier. But the other thing that the research paper said, and we'll have a link to it in the show notes as well, and I quote here, the number of daily meetings increased by 26% from 3.36 meetings per day in 2019 to 4.24 meetings per day in 2020. So there was an increase in meetings. Yet the time spent in meetings declined year over year. So I think this is something we've seen here at AE as well, is online meetings tend to be a little bit more efficient. At least, I mean, our AE meetings are kind of barbaric in a way. It's just like, hey, how's everybody going? Okay, let's go. No chit chat, straight to the point. There's no warming up of like, how are your kids doing or anything else. Like, no, if I'm running a meeting, it's literally, okay, this is the agenda. Here's what we're doing. Here's the outcome. Let's go. And that's it. So there's no like bonding necessarily, which I think a lot of meetings are great for, in fact, but in online meetings, that's not the case. So curious to hear your thoughts on this after seeing this report and those stats.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I don't know if you had this experience, Tan, because we've been basically working from home for the same amount of time, like over a decade. And before the pandemic, when working from home became more normalized, one comment I would always get for years and years and years is, oh, I don't know how you work from home. Like I would just be so distracted. I'd be watching TV. I'd be doing laundry or something like that. Like I need to be in the office to focus. And I always thought those comments were interesting because I personally have found myself way more productive at home than the office. Even when I was working with corporate and for whatever reason, maybe I had to work from home for some day, like, I don't know why, if there was some appointment or something, I would always find that I was more productive working from home because all of those distractions kind of go out the window. The distractions, like you said, you have at the office, they like walking by somebody's cubicle and commenting on whatever they had on their desk, or the office cooler chit chat, that sort of stuff goes out the window. And so I find myself with the opposite problem, which is I'd be working and then I'd realize 20 minutes later, like, oh, my water glass is empty. I need to go get some water or something like that. And I would just be so focused that I would have to force myself to take breaks. So it's kind of interesting that this has played out the way that, like my experience and maybe yours too, it's kind of interesting that seems to be the way that it has played out. But I'm also not surprised by the stat you said where the poorly productive employees before the pandemic got worse, because I guess I'm a generally somewhat disciplined person when it comes to work. But if somebody is like goofing off at the office and needed the threat of their boss walking by their cube to stay on task, if all of a sudden their boss isn't walking by the cube anymore, I can definitely see how that would go down the drain. Now in the live stream, Phil says something interesting where he's wondering if maybe the increase is like, it did increase that year, but maybe it's not sustainable. Maybe it was people like really going hard, trying to keep up their work levels and kind of like stress induced a little bit. And it'll be interesting. We should do a follow-up of this episode in a year. If they do a report like a year later, I'm curious what 2021 versus 2020 is going to be like. Cause I'm wondering how sustainable these longer hours and stuff like that are.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that the poor performers got worse during the pandemic, because if you're already a poor performer in typically very structured environments, when you're working from home, there's like less structure. So it's even more upon you to do the work and do stuff on time. So if you're already struggling, like you probably need the most help and you probably didn't get any of that. You probably got the least help during this time. So I can totally see how, that has been a big discrepancy there between performances. It's one of the reasons why we put Productive at Home together as well, is just to help people working from home, and something we've been doing for over a decade now. And so when COVID hit and we saw that this was happening, like we immediately put out a course so we could help people like them. But it also showed that the people who are already good performers just tend to stay good performers as well. And so I thought that was really interesting to see too. And also like the number of meetings went up. And I think that's maybe natural byproduct of going remote, in the sense that, you have to maybe check up on people a little bit more that you couldn't do otherwise. So I can see how that could be, but I also think it might be an overcorrection. I would not be surprised if they do this research again next year and they compare it year over year, that the meetings went down, because there's not that transition period of like, oh, we need to figure out how we're going to work together and let's have more meetings and stuff and be in sync and that kind of thing. So hopefully, especially 2022, it seems like the hybrid model is going to be more common, where people are working remote for maybe a few days a week and then at the office as well. And so I think it'll be interesting to see where the number of meetings goes then. But overall, I would say I'm overly surprised that 2020 was more productive than 2019. And I think it just shows that, remote work can be very productive. Now, if there was a consequence to be paid in terms of stress, that's, to be seen. There's no data here to point to that. Just from my own observations, just from talking to people over the years, I think it was more stressful, just as people were trying to figure out, but I think mostly because of COVID, not because of working from home necessarily, and just being cooped up and all that stuff. Like, I think that had a bigger effect than just the idea of working from home, because if you're at home the whole time, you can't go anywhere and you're stuck, and considering all the world conditions that were happening, like that's a very different type of working from home versus, oh yeah, I can walk outside and grab a coffee if I want, or go, lay on the sand for a little bit or on grass and come back an hour later and go on my meeting. Like that's a very different lifestyle, right? So I think it'll be interesting to see. But if that report comes out, we'll keep you all posted, and it'll be interesting to see what happens then.
Yeah, Fiona in the live stream, just to touch on what you said about the number of meetings and the hybrid, she actually mentioned an interesting but not good necessarily experience she's had. And I bet a lot of people listening to this can relate, where they did, during the pandemic, everyone's working from home. There's these more meetings, these checkup status meetings and stuff like that. And what she's found is, since going back to normal, so to speak, and going the hybrid model, or going back to work, traveling more, going back to the office, I should say, traveling more, that has picked up, but the number of meetings hasn't hasn't declined yet for her. So she's finding it really, really difficult to keep up. That all of a sudden you're going back to whatever the new normal is, but all these meetings, increased meetings are still happening, and she's finding it really hard to keep up. And I bet that's going to happen. So hopefully what you said is true, where this, we're just in like a transition period now, but hopefully that does settle out, or people are going to have a totally different set of stress.
All right. So it's the end of the episode here. So we're going to wrap it up here. And as always, we want to make sure it's actionable. So what is one thing that you took away from today? What's the one thing that stood out in this podcast episode for you? And whatever that might be, I would suggest that you write that down and then commit to taking action on it this week. Ideally, starting right now or starting tomorrow. Let's make sure we do it right away, because if we don't, we tend to not act on it soon enough. So I would recommend that you do that. And next week's episode is an interview that Brooks did with the executive coach, Edward Sullivan. So we can't wait for you to listen to this and learn more about leadership and productivity from this highly sought after speaker. And if you want to find links to everything that we mentioned, you can find them in the show notes by going to theproductivityshow.com/410, or just swipe up and you'll see them in your app as well. Thanks again, and we'll see you next Productive Monday.